back. Man, I still don't know how people do any type of intros. I've tried like 4 different ones of these, and every time I feel so uncomfortable. I'm gonna figure it out though, don't you worry. Obviously in this video, we're gonna be doing the same thing that I did in the past couple videos, just this time we're gonna be talking about the quarterback class and the tight end class. Now I'm doing these together because the significant players in each one of these classes is relatively small compared to the other ones, especially with people who will actually impact fantasy football this year. But what I wanna talk about first, like I did in the last video, is what actually makes one of these quarterbacks or tight ends valuable for fantasy football. And the issue with it is that it's pretty dependent on actual NFL draft capital, specifically with quarterbacks. In my personal opinion, quarterbacks are probably the hardest position in professional sports to scout. So some random dude on the internet like me with a microphone should be trusted to actually scout and evaluate these players when there's people being paid millions of dollars to actually do that. So for the most part, I'm not going to try to determine who's better and who's not. I let the NFL teams do that, and they made it relatively easy in this draft class because there was only one quarterback taken in the first round and not another quarterback taken until the third round. Because of that, they're not super valuable. There were 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round last year, and Mac Jones was the only one that really succeeded last year, and he still wasn't very valuable for fantasy football. The one thing we can look for in these later quarterbacks or other quarterbacks who are taken around the same area is the rushing upside. The rushing upside for fantasy quarterbacks is like the receiving upside with fantasy running backs. Pure fantasy gold. That's why people like Trey Lance and Justin Fields were liked so much more than Mac Jones last year in the fantasy community, and why Malik Willis was liked so much this year in the fantasy community. So it's really hard to see anyone in this quarterback class being super valuable. I mean, Kenny Pickett will probably end up starting majority of the games this year, but that's not even a given. And I'm sure that there will be, but nobody else has a guarantee that they'll start any games this year. So relying on them to be very valuable at all is tough, to say the least. It's also pretty hard to see many of these tight ends to be really valuable right away. Last year, Kyle Pitts was taken with the 4th pick in the NFL draft. He pretty much had the best rookie tight end season we'd ever seen, and he still finished as the tight end 7 on the year, which is not very valuable, especially when you're finishing below where you're being drafted. Needless to say, trusting any of these tight ends is going to be really hard to do, which is why I'm only going to talk about a couple of them. Okay, with all of that said, let's get into it. So first off, we're going to go with the quarterbacks, and we're going to start off with Kenny Pickett being taken with 20th pick in the first round this year. He was taken out of Pittsburgh, and he's going to Pittsburgh, which is nice. Now, the big story around him was his tiny little baby hands. Now, I haven't found any research or any data to show correlation between having small hands and there being success in the NFL, although the only person to succeed with his size of hands has been Michael Vick, which Kenny Pickett is not Michael Vick, athletically speaking at least. But he's going into a relatively good situation. I mean, he has great weapons. You got Najee Harris, who showed to be an absolute beast last year, great for receiving, great for checking down, so that's always a nice safety valve for young quarterbacks. He also has Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Pat Freiermuth, they just drafted George Pickens, and Calvin Austin, so needless to say, they got a plethora of weapons. One of the main issues is that they had the 26th ranked offensive line by PFF last year, which is never good for young quarterbacks. Now, their offensive line is super young, so there's a chance that it's going to get a lot better. You never really want to try to predict those kind of things. He does have relatively good size, and he's in the 75th percentile for his 40-yard dash, so he does have some of that rushing upside ability, which is nice, but definitely not something you're going to be relying on from him. Nobody else in the quarterback class was taken anywhere near him, which makes him the super obvious quarterback 1 in this class for fantasy. That's because he's going to get the opportunity. So yeah, not much else to say. We'll move on to the next quarterback. The next quarterback taken was Desmond Ritter with 10th pick by the Atlanta Falcons. He's coming out of Cincinnati, recently took them to the college football playoffs. Now, he actually probably has the best athletic profile in this class, even though a lot of people thought Malik Willis would. I mean, Malik didn't test, but seeing Desmond Ritter at 6'3", almost 210 with 10-inch hands, also being in the 97th percentile with his 40-yard dash and the 95th percentile with his burst score, that's pretty exciting to see. One of the main concerns with him, though, was his accuracy, which has been something that you're not historically been able to teach people. Josh Allen's probably one of the best examples of somebody recently coming out known to be inaccurate, then becoming extremely accurate. Now, you don't want to put those type of expectations on anybody, but it does at least give you some type of hope, and with his athletic profile, at least there's some type of upside. Marcus Mariota is the starting quarterback there this year, but I think think that gives him a good chance to start a couple games, which will be good for him. Or we can see if that talent shows on the field at the professional level. But a lot of people think that the Falcons will invest in a quarterback next year because they think they're going to probably be one of the top 3 picks. And if that's the case, then Desmond Ritter probably won't ever really get to see the field or won't ever be anything more than a backup, at least on the Falcons. But yeah, taking the second quarterback off the board, early 3rd round draft capital, which isn't great for a quarterback, but this is kind of what started that quarterback run. Next up was Malik Willis, taken out of Liberty by the Tennessee Titans with the 22nd pick in the 3rd round. Now, there's been all that controversy lately with Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis about him not mentoring him, but that doesn't really have an impact on fantasy football, but just thought I should mention it since it's been in the news lately. Malik Willis, though, is a very interesting case because a lot of people thought that he would definitely go in the 1st round. I know I have some friends who are Pittsburgh Steelers fans and they really wanted him over Kenny Pickett. I know some of them were really disappointed, honestly. But seeing him drop this far, there just must be something that we don't know that the NFL teams all knew, which is why we try to leave, or at least in my personal opinion, we should leave those things for the NFL teams. But I think this is a pretty good spot because everyone said that Malik Willis was a project and that he needs to develop. Sitting behind Ryan Tannehill and watching how he operates is, I think, really good and be good for him, and it'll let him develop like everybody said that he needs to. And they just drafted Treylon Burks, so somebody that they will be around the same age and they can develop with. But unless Ryan Tannehill gets hurt or there's some crazy unforeseen drop off this next year, he probably won't start for at least 2 years. So tough to put a lot of stock into him right now, at least for fantasy football. Next up, we got Matt Corral with the 30th pick in the 3rd round. He was taken out of Ole Miss by the Carolina Panthers. He's somebody who actually really interests me because I think there's a chance that he can start a lot of games this year because Sam Darnold right now is their starting quarterback. And I mean, how long do we think that's going to last, right? I mean, we all watch the same Sam Darnold last year? I mean, that guy stinks at football. I'm sorry. And the Carolina Panthers also said that Corral was number 1 on their board, at least quarterback wise. Now that could just be revisionist history, but who knows? If that's the case, then they might really like him. He's a little small and doesn't have too many impressive measurables, but I do think he has some special NFL arm talent. I think he's somebody who can get opportunity, and what's nice about that is a young quarterback who gets the opportunity, there's never a time where they're more valuable. So you can trade them, move on from them, whatever you need. If you don't think he's really going to be that guy, you could think he's going to be that guy, and then you struck gold because you didn't have to take him until like the 3rd or 4th round if it's a super flex league, or you picked him up after the draft in a normal league. Yo, I don't know if y'all can tell, my camera just died and I had to wait for it to charge. Now we're back. Don't know if it looks any different or sounds any different, but regardless, we're moving on to Bailey Zappy, who was taken with the 32nd pick in this draft out of Western Kentucky to New England. I mean, he's not going to be anything more than a backup for Mac Jones, so nothing really to say here. I mean, he's just the most New England Patriots quarterback you could ever ask for. If he gets a starting job, he'll probably be amazing and throw like 3 touchdowns on 275 yards passing on 20 passes. So that's just kind of how it goes there, but he'd be terrible anywhere else. I wouldn't really consider him too much. You can see he's slightly undersized and his measurables are nothing too impressive. Kind of just got to mention him here since he was taken. Anyways, moving on to the last quarterback we're going to be talking about, which is Sam Howell out of North Carolina, taken by the Washington Commanders with the 1st pick in the 5th round. Another probably backup, going to be Carson Wentz. Also, Taylor Heineke's there. Really hard for me to say that he's any better than Taylor Heineke. Somebody who I also wouldn't put too much thought into. I do find it interesting that he showed some rushing upside while in college, yet ran over a 5-second 40-yard dash. I mean, that's like some offensive defensive line numbers. That's terrible. So no upside for him here. Don't really see him playing much. As you can tell, is the case for a lot of these quarterbacks, and kind of hard to get excited to talk about these guys without any of the draft capital. I really doubt that any of them are going to play that much, especially in this first year. So Kenny Pickett, obvious quarterback 1. From there, pick your poison, I guess. I don't know. Matt Corral probably has the best chance to play right away, so maybe go with him. Malik Willis probably the highest upside, but won't play for like 2 years, so don't know what to tell you. Moving on to the tight ends, who are almost as unimpressive. Definitely no Kyle Pitts in this draft, which there aren't in most drafts, but Trey McBride was the first tight end taken in this draft. He was taken with the 23rd pick in the 2nd round by the Arizona Cardinals out of Colorado State. You can see he's pretty big. 6'4", 245 pounds. He's in the 89th percentiles for his 40-yard dash and the 86th percentile for his speed score. He was most people's tight end 1 before the draft, so this stays the same since he was the first tight end taken. And he goes into a good offense with Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray. The one real problem is probably going to be his initial opportunity, since they do have Zach Ertz, who showed to still be really good last year. He finished 6th in tight ends in total fantasy points last year, which is pretty impressive given everybody thought that he was completely dead. He also did just sign a brand new contract for 3 years. He does have an out after next season, so 2 more years at least with the Arizona Cardinals, which is normally about the time that it takes for these tight ends to develop and them to really show their potential. So it lines up nicely, but again, these tight ends probably won't be good for fantasy for at least 2 to 3 more years. So definitely tight end 1, but I wouldn't expect too much from him this year. Probably catch a couple touchdowns, but hard to predict those kind of things. Ideally, we want to see those flashes, but again, not somebody who I'm really going to count on week in and week out this year. All right, next was Jelani Woods, taken with the 9th pick in the 3rd round by the Indianapolis Colts out of Virginia. Now, they also just re-signed Mo Cox, but they did just lose Jack Doyle, so there's definitely an opportunity to get some targets there. It's a relatively new offense that runs through Jonathan Taylor, but they also just signed Matt Ryan, so we don't know exactly how that's going to go. What is nice about Jelani is how much of a freak he is athletically. I mean, look at this. 6'7", 250 pounds, the 89th percentile 40-yard dash, 94th percentile speed score, 95th percentile burst score, 82nd percentile agility score, and 98th percentile in his catch radius. I mean, absolute freak athletically, obviously. Solid draft capital, relative opportunity there, but again, somebody who's not going to produce right away, and there's not an obvious role for him to step right into. So somebody who I like to stash given his upside with his athleticism, but like all of these players we're going to be talking about, I'm not trusting them to do anything these first couple years. The next tight end taken was Greg Dulich by the Denver Broncos, taken with the 16th pick in the 3rd round out of UCLA. Now you can see he's somebody who doesn't show anything super impressive athletically. The one thing that's really nice about him is where he got drafted to, which is the Broncos. They just got Russell Wilson, so they're expected to be one of the elite offenses in the NFL, and they also traded Noah Fant in that deal, but they also did recently draft Albert Okwuegbunam. I might have butchered that. I'm sorry if I did. Tough name, but he's been with the team a little bit, and he's definitely shown some flashes. You can see he's a way better athlete than Greg. So another person who has some upside given the quarterback and offense he'll be with, but I don't see him getting that starting role for at least a couple years again. The only other people to mention really would be Jeremy Ruckert out of Ohio State. He got drafted to the Jets, who I've talked about in the past couple of videos. They're a really up-and-coming offense. They haven't really shown it on the field per se, but Zach Wilson has definitely had his flashes, and they added Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. Not to mention, they had a pretty good offensive line last year without Mekhi Becton, who'll be coming back. So definitely some upside for that offense there to keep improving, also given the fact that they're super young. So if Zach Wilson develops into this guy who he could be, then Jeremy could be pretty good, but that's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts for me to really put a lot of stock into him. So keep him in your mind, but I wouldn't be targeting him or anything like that. Kind of the same thing with Cade Otton. I've seen a couple people try to really push for him just because he's on the Buccaneers and he's with Tom Brady, who loves to use his tight ends. But like I said with Rachaad White, who knows how much longer this offense is really going to be elite for. And because of that, it's hard to really trust somebody who isn't ready right now. So he's somebody who I've heard a lot of people talk about, but me personally, I'm just out on him. I think those are pretty much the main people to really mention regarding these two positions. Obviously, there could be some people who break out who I didn't mention here, but given the draft capital of everyone, kind of tough to see. Even a lot of people here could not be anything at all in the NFL, as you could probably tell by my unenthusiastic attitude this whole time. Anyways, more videos coming soon. Going to be doing rankings and probably mock drafts for my next videos. Don't know which order, but they'll be coming. Don't you worry about that. So see y'all on those. Peace.